Now that we have this user object, we should store it in the app component and make it available to our entire app. So let's go to app.js. Earlier, I told you that here we should declare a state variable for storing the current user. So we call the state hook and declare a variable called user. Now we should make this object available to our entire app. To do that, we're going to use React Context. If you have never worked with React Context, don't worry, I'm going to explain exactly how it works. So here in the app folder, let's add a new folder called auth. We're going to write all our authentication code inside this folder. So let's add a new file here called context.js. Here we should create a React context object. So first we import React and then call react.createContext. This returns an object. We're going to call that auth context. Now, the reason I'm using Pascal naming convention here is because we're going to use this object in our JSX expressions. So auth context has a couple of properties, provider and consumer. These are both React components, okay? So let's export auth context from this module. All right, now back to our app component. We're going to wrap our entire app with auth context.provider. So instead of this fragment, we're going to use auth context.provider. And then we need to close it over here. Good. Now with this provider, we can provide a value to our entire app. So the object that we pass here will be available to any components below this provider. Okay. So we can pass the user object, and every component will be able to read the current user, but they will not be able to change the current user. In our login screen, the moment we get this user object, we need to update the user variable in the app component. So in addition to the user object, I also want to pass the function for updating this object, okay? So here we're going to pass an object with two properties, user and setUser. Okay, now we go to the login screen. Here we want to access the object that is provided by the auth context. So we're going to use another hook called context, use context. Here we should specify the type of context we're interested in. Because in a real app, we could have multiple context objects. So we can have a context for the current user and another context for the current theme, okay? So here we specify the type of context, auth context. Now this returns an object. Let's call that auth context. This object is exactly the object that we have passed over here. Okay, so when we extract the user object from our JSON Web Token, instead of logging it on the console, we're going to call auth context that set user to user. This is going to update the user object in our app component. Now the final step, instead of rendering auth navigator here, we want to conditionally render different navigators depending on the authentication status of the user. So if we have a user object, then we're going to render app navigator to take the user to the main screen of the app. Otherwise, we're going to render auth navigator so the user can see the welcome screen and log in. Let's test our app. Okay, here's our app. Let's log in with mosh@domain.com and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Beautiful, it's successfully logged in. So let's move on to the next step.